sky above the high desert of California is deceptively quiet, a vast canvas of pale blue that masks the silent revolution taking place within its atmospheric boundaries. For more than a century, the apex of military might, the ultimate arbiter of geopolitical disputes, and the definitive symbol of national security has been encapsulated in a single, deeply romanticized figure: the elite fighter pilot. This individual, selected from the absolute top percentage of human capability, possesses a rare combination of physiological resilience, hyper-fast cognitive processing, and an almost supernatural instinct for spatial awareness. They are trained to endure crushing gravitational forces that drain blood from the brain to make split-second decisions where a delay of a single millisecond means a catastrophic mid-air disintegration, and to command machines that cost tens of millions of dollars at the absolute edge of their aerodynamic envelopes. The entire architecture of global air power, from the design of cockpits to the multi-billion-dollar training pipelines stretching over years, has been constructed around the physical limitations and intellectual capacities of this human operator. Yet, in a stark, windowless simulation laboratory, and later in the actual physical skies above Edwards Air Force Base, that entire foundational paradigm was permanently shattered. The era of the human ace did not merely enter its twilight. It was systematically dismantled by an entity that does not breathe, does not blink, does not experience fear, and does not forget. The catalyst for this tectonic shift was a series of trials designed to push the boundaries of autonomous systems, moving far beyond simple automated flight or pre-programmed responses into the realm of true operational autonomy. When the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency initiated the Alpha Dogfight trials, the objective was not just to test a piece of software, but to answer a fundamental existential question that had divided aviation experts for decades. Can a machine, relying purely on artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms, outmaneuver and defeat a human adversary who possesses years of real-world combat experience and refined tactical instinct? The setup was intentionally brutal and uncompromising. A human pilot, a graduate of the prestigious Air Force Weapons School, the absolute elite of tactical aviation, equivalent to the legendary Top Gun program, was placed in a high-fidelity flight simulator. On the other side of the digital divide was an artificial intelligence agent, developed not through rigid, line-by-line coding of rules, but through a process known as deep reinforcement learning. This AI had not been taught how to fly by a human instructor. Instead, it had been placed in a virtual environment, given control of a simulated aircraft, and told simply to achieve a specific objective, which was to gain a dominant position behind its opponent. Through millions of iterations running at speeds impossible for a human brain to comprehend, the AI flew against versions of itself, learning from every crash, every missed opportunity, and every tactical error. It compressed decades of aerial combat experience into a matter of weeks, evolving its own highly non-traditional methods of flight. When the two forces finally met in the virtual arena, the outcome was expected by many traditionalists to be a close contest, a battle where human ingenuity, creativity, and the ability to adapt to unpredictable situations would ultimately triumph over the sterile logic of a machine. Instead, the simulation yielded a result that sent shockwaves through military commands worldwide, transforming theoretical concerns into immediate, pressing realities. The score was 5-0, a total unmitigated shutout. The human pilot, despite employing every advanced maneuver, every defensive break, and every tactical deception in their extensive repertoire, was unable to score a single hit against the AI. More alarming still was how the AI achieved this dominance. It did not fly the way humans are taught to fly. It did not respect the traditional boundaries of energy management and turning rooms that have governed aerial tactics since the First World War. The AI operated at the absolute physical limits of the simulated aircraft, executing maneuvers with a degree of pixel-perfect precision that no human hand on a flight stick could ever replicate. It tracked the human opponent with an omnipresent awareness, calculating trajectories at nanosecond speeds and aiming its simulated weapon systems with a cold, unyielding accuracy that left absolutely no room for escape. Every time the human tried to exploit a perceived weakness, the AI had already anticipated the move, countered it, and repositioned itself for a fatal strike before the human brain could even process the failure of its initial tactic. This decisive victory in the digital realm was profound, But the true test of this technology lay in transitioning from a pristine computer simulation to the messy, unpredictable environment of the real world. Critics argued that a simulation removes the variable of physical risk, the imperfections of atmospheric turbulence, the lag of mechanical actuators, and the unpredictable anomalies of real-world sensors. To bridge this immense gap, engineers and researchers turned to a highly modified test aircraft known as the X-62A VISTA, a unique variable stability in-flight simulator aircraft based on the F-16 platform. This aircraft was specifically redesigned to mimic the flight characteristics of other vehicles and, crucially, to allow an artificial intelligence agent to take direct control of its flight surfaces in real-world conditions. Over a series of historic test flights, the AI was loaded into the aircraft's computers, and the machine was sent into the skies to engage in real-world combat maneuvers against human-piloted fighters. The results confirmed what the simulations had hinted at. The digital mind was fully capable of translating its virtual dominance into physical reality. Traveling at hundreds of miles per hour, pulling intense gravitational forces that require human pilots to wear specialized pressure suits and perform intense breathing techniques just to remain conscious, the AI-controlled aircraft maneuvered with a fluid, terrifying efficiency. It adapted instantly to wind shears, sensor noise, and the physical limitations of the airframe, proving that autonomous systems could not only survive in the chaotic arena of actual flight, but could actively dominate it. The implications of this breakthrough extend far beyond the technical achievement of flying aircraft. They fundamentally alter the strategic calculus of global power dynamics, particularly in the highly contested theater of the Indo-Pacific. For decades, the primary objective of major regional competitors, most notably China's People's Liberation Army, has been to develop an anti-access and area denial strategy designed to complicate and deter Western military intervention. Beijing has invested heavily in a massive, sophisticated infrastructure comprising thousands of long-range ballistic missiles, advanced integrated air defense systems, and a rapidly expanding fleet of modern, highly capable stealth fighters like the J-20. This strategy is built upon a specific set of assumptions regarding the operational limits of an opposing force. It assumes that an adversary can only deploy a finite number of highly trained pilots, that these pilots require extensive logistical support, that they suffer from fatigue, and that their decision-making cycles can be overwhelmed by sheer numbers, speed, and geographic distance. The introduction of a fully operational, hyper-capable artificial intelligence pilot completely invalidates these foundational assumptions. An AI pilot does not require years of expensive training pipelines that can be disrupted by conflict. It does not experience the physical limitations of exhaustion after hours of continuous operations. It does not require rest, hydration, or emotional recovery. Most critically, it strips away the primary bottleneck of modern air power, the human capacity to process information under extreme pressure. To understand why this is a strategic paradigm shift, one must examine the nature of a modern high-intensity aerial engagement. The romanticized concept of a close-range visual dogfight, while still a critical benchmark for testing agility and precision, is largely a secondary concern in contemporary warfare. Modern air combat is defined by beyond visual range engagements, where aircraft detect each other at distances of over 100 miles, using advanced active electronically scanned array radars and passive infrared search and track systems. In this arena, the battle is fought not with machine guns, but with hypersonic and advanced medium-range air-to-air missiles, traveling at multiple times the speed of sound. Success in this environment is entirely dependent on the speed and accuracy of the kill chain. The process of detecting a target, tracking its movement, identifying its intent, deciding to engage, and executing the strike. For a human pilot, this process involves looking at multiple digital displays, interpreting complex radar data, communicating with early warning aircraft via data links, managing their electronic countermeasure suites, and factoring in their own fuel and weapon constraints. This creates a cognitive load that is immense, and even the most seasoned pilots experience a delay in their observe, orient, decide, act loop. An artificial intelligence agent, by contrast, operates on an entirely different temporal plane. It can ingest data from hundreds of disparate sensor streams simultaneously, fuse that information into a perfect, real-time picture of the battle space, and execute an optimal tactical decision in a fraction of a second. Furthermore, the physical limitations of the human body have long acted as a hard ceiling on aircraft design and performance. For the past half century, fighter jets have been engineered around the physiological constraints of the person sitting in the cockpit. An airframe might be structurally capable of enduring forces of 12 or 15 Gs, but because a human pilot will lose consciousness, experience spatial disorientation, or suffer severe physical injury at anything above 9 Gs, the aircraft's flight control computers are artificially restricted to protect the occupant. When the human is removed from the equation, these engineering handcuffs are discarded. An autonomous aircraft can be designed to perform radical, high-alpha maneuvers, instantaneous turns, and violent evasive actions that would instantly incapacitate a human being. This allows for the creation of next-generation airframes that are lighter, more aerodynamic, and infinitely more agile, completely shifting the metrics of what constitutes an uninterceptable target. A machine that can pull 15 Gs to evade an incoming missile, while simultaneously maintaining a perfect track on 3 separate targets, fundamentally redefines the concept of survivability in a contested airspace. The true revolutionary nature of this technology, however, lies in its capacity for infinite scalability and frictionless dissemination. When a human pilot gains invaluable combat experience, that knowledge remains locked within their individual mind and muscle memory. They can attempt to pass that knowledge on through debriefs, manuals, and instructional flights, but the transfer process is slow, imperfect, and heavily dependent on the learning capacity of the recipient. It takes thousands of flight hours and millions of dollars to cultivate a single weapons school instructor. If that pilot is lost or retires, that accumulated expertise vanishes from the active force. With artificial intelligence, the paradigm is inverted. When an AI agent discovers a superior tactical maneuver during a simulation, or learns how to better counter an enemy's electronic jamming technique during a real-world flight, that specific piece of operational intelligence is instantly translated into lines of code. It can be immediately replicated and uploaded to every single autonomous aircraft across an entire global fleet within seconds. Every machine becomes as experienced, as lethal, and as tactically flawless as the single best iteration of the software. The fleet does not suffer from a lack of experienced personnel. It possesses a uniform, peak-level competence that never degrades, never grows old, and never varies due to human error or emotional instability. This reality creates an unprecedented asymmetrical advantage that alters the calculus of deterrence in regions like the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea. Traditional deterrence relies on a balance of forces, where an aggressor calculates the cost of an attack based on the visible assets of the defender. If an attacking force possesses a 5-to-1 numerical superiority in aircraft, they may conclude that they can overwhelm the defender through attrition. But when the defender's assets are powered by an omnipresent, hyper-fast digital intelligence capable of controlling swarms of collaborative combat aircraft with coordinated, flawless precision, numerical superiority ceases to be a decisive factor. The autonomous system can manage dozens of simultaneous engagements, allocating weapons with mathematical optimization, executing defensive maneuvers in perfect synchronization, and operating inside the decision cycle of the human attackers to such a degree that the numerical advantage is rapidly eroded. This introduces a profound element of strategic uncertainty for planners in Beijing, who must now confront an adversary whose capabilities cannot be accurately measured by counting holes on a runway or holes in a port, but are instead hidden within the invisible, rapidly evolving parameters of an advanced software algorithm that trains 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, preparing for a conflict it has already fought millions of times in the virtual realm. The geopolitical landscape of the Indo-Pacific has long been governed by an intricate, highly calculated balance of geographic distances, industrial capacities, and the human limits of military personnel. For decades, strategic planners in Beijing built a formidable architecture designed specifically to exploit the structural vulnerabilities of traditional Western power projection. This strategy, heavily reliant on massive quantities of advanced anti-ship ballistic missiles, dense networks of integrated air defense systems, and a rapidly expanding fleet of modern stealth fighters, assumed that any opposing force would be fundamentally constrained by logistics, human endurance, and a finite pool of elite operators. The primary objective was to create a zone of risk so high that the cost of intervention would become politically and operationally prohibitive. However, the introduction of scalable, hyper-capable artificial intelligence into the theater of aerial combat acts as a profound disruptor, turning long-held strategic assumptions into obsolete concepts and forcing a complete reevaluation of how potential conflicts in the region would unfold. This technological evolution does not merely augment existing capabilities. It introduces an entirely new operational framework that directly challenges the core tenets of regional defense strategies. At the heart of this shift is the concept of algorithmic speed and its impact on the modern command structure. In any potential high-intensity scenario over the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea, the volume of data generated across the battle space will be utterly overwhelming for human operators. Thousands of sensor nodes, satellite feeds, radar arrays, and electronic warfare suites will flood command centers with simultaneous, conflicting, and rapidly changing information. In a traditional setup, this data must be filtered, analyzed, and passed up a chain of command to human decision makers who must then assess the threat, determine the rules of engagement, and issue orders to pilots in the air. This process, known as the decision cycle, takes time. Minutes, sometimes even tens of minutes. In an era where hypersonic weapons and low observable drones can bridge vast distances in a matter of seconds, a decision cycle measured in minutes is a critical vulnerability. An artificial intelligence agent operates entirely outside this human temporal constraint. By processing millions of data points simultaneously and executing optimal tactical responses at nanosecond speeds, the autonomous system effectively compresses the timeline of engagement to near zero. This creates a situation where an adversary relying on human decision-making loops is constantly reacting to events that have already passed, rendering their tactical maneuvers permanently out of sync with the actual state of the battle. This compressed timeline introduces an immense layer of strategic uncertainty for regional planners who have historically relied on predictable, step-by-step escalatory ladders. When the opposing force is driven by an entity capable of calculating every mathematical permutation of a conflict simultaneously, traditional methods of signaling, posturing, and tactical deception lose their efficacy. An AI pilot does not possess an emotional state. It cannot be deterred by displays of force, it cannot be distracted by atmospheric noise, and it does not experience the cognitive fatigue that degrades human judgment over extended periods of high stress. This lack of psychological vulnerability completely alters the calculus of deterrence. For years, the prevailing doctrine in the region assumed that sheer numbers and geographic proximity would eventually exhaust an expeditionary force. A pilot flying a fifth-generation fighter can only maintain peak operational awareness for a limited number of hours before physical exhaustion, dehydration, and cognitive overload begin to severely degrade their performance. An autonomous fleet, however, can maintain an unyielding peak efficiency posture indefinitely, rotating platforms seamlessly as fuel and maintenance requirements dictate, without ever dropping the collective level of tactical competence. Furthermore, this technological leap fundamentally redefines the relationship between industrial capacity and military effectiveness. Historically, the strength of an air force was measured by its ability to replace lost hardware and, more critically, to train replacement pilots to fill the empty cockpits. While a modern industrial nation can accelerate the production of aircraft frames and electronics during a prolonged conflict, it cannot accelerate the biological and cognitive development of a human being. It takes years of intense, highly specialized training to produce a pilot capable of surviving a modern contested airspace. The human operator is the ultimate bottleneck in terms of both time and financial investment. Artificial intelligence completely removes this bottleneck from the strategic equation. The intelligence driving the platform is entirely decoupled from the physical hardware. If an autonomous aircraft is lost in an engagement, the accumulated tactical experience, the refined maneuvers, and the situational insights gained during that flight are not lost with the airframe. The digital mind remains intact within the central architecture, ready to be instantly duplicated and uploaded into a brand new platform rolling off the assembly line. The force does not suffer from a dilution of skill as a conflict progresses. Rather, the collective intelligence of the entire fleet grows exponentially with every single hour of operational deployment. This characteristic of infinite scalability manifests most vividly in the development of collaborative combat aircraft, often referred to as loyal wingmen. The traditional model of military aviation relies on small formations of highly expensive, multi-role stealth aircraft, each piloted by a human who must manage both their own survival and the execution of the mission. The new paradigm introduces a decentralized structure where a single manned asset, or even a localized command node, acts as a coordinator for a swarm of smaller, highly agile, autonomous drones powered by the same advanced AI pilot. These uncrewed platforms can be mass-produced at a fraction of the cost of a traditional fighter, as they do not require heavy, complex life support systems, cockpit displays, or extensive structural reinforcement designed to protect a human body from extreme gravitational forces. In a tactical scenario, these autonomous wingmen can be deployed forward into the most dangerous, highly contested zones to act as sensor pickets, electronic warfare decoys, or weapons platforms. They can absorb the initial wave of an adversary's integrated air defenses, forcing ground-based radar arrays to reveal their positions and exhausting the defender's inventory of surface-to-air missiles. The operational synergy of this approach creates an asymmetrical dilemma for any defending force. If a regional adversary encounters a formation of these autonomous systems, they are forced to engage them with their most advanced, expensive, and limited long-range interceptors. Every missile fired at a low-cost autonomous drone is a missile that is unavailable to target high-value manned assets or strategic infrastructure. Moreover, because these autonomous wingmen operate with a degree of coordinated precision that mimics a single, distributed organism, they can execute complex multi-axis attacks that overwhelm the tracking capacities of modern radar systems. They can position themselves to provide perfect, real-time target illumination for one another, sharing data across low probability of intercept networks that are exceptionally difficult to disrupt or jam. This transforms the aerial engagement from a series of individual duels into a highly optimized, automated systems-level conflict, where the side with the superior algorithmic coordination holds an insurmountable advantage. This shift also forces a profound reconsideration of geographic advantages. For a long time, the vast distances of the Pacific Theater were considered a natural defense barrier for regional powers, requiring Western forces to rely on a limited number of vulnerable forward bases or a small fleet of aircraft carriers that must operate within range of long-range anti-ship missiles. Autonomous systems free from the physical constraints of human pilot endurance allow for the design of long-range, high-endurance unmanned platforms that can remain airborne for days at a time through advanced automated refueling protocols. These assets can be launched from deep within secure sanctuaries, thousands of miles away from the primary theater of operations, and loiter outside the effective engagement zones of regional defenses until needed. This effectively neutralizes the geographic leverage that regional competitors spent decades trying to establish, as it deters the effectiveness of short-range denial weapons and forces the defender to extend their own sensor networks and defensive perimeters far beyond their continental margins, diluting their concentration of force. The response from competing nations to this realization has been a frantic, highly funded scramble to develop parallel capabilities, turning the international arena into a silent war of software development and computational power. The competition is no longer just about who can build the stealthiest airframe or the biggest engine. It is fundamentally about who can build the most robust machine learning models, secure the most advanced semiconductor supply chains, and manufacture the high-performance computing clusters required to train these digital minds. However, copy-pasting code or reverse engineering hardware does not automatically yield operational equality in the realm of artificial intelligence. The effectiveness of a deep reinforcement learning model is heavily dependent on the quality, variety, and sheer volume of the data used during its training phase. Because Western frameworks have integrated decades of high-fidelity flight telemetry, global operational experience, and complex multi-domain exercise data into their simulation environments, their digital pilots possess a foundational depth of nuance that is incredibly difficult to replicate from scratch. Ultimately, the proliferation of this technology creates a reality where the traditional metrics of air superiority, such as the number of available airframes, the physical bravery of individual pilots, and the proximity to the theater of operations, are superseded by the maturity of a nation's digital ecosystem. The strategic balance in the Indo-Pacific is shifting from a contest of industrial mass to a contest of cognitive automation. For planners looking at the horizon of future global stability, the message is unambiguous. The ability to project power, deter aggression, and secure sovereign airspace will belong exclusively to those who can master the digital skies, leaving those reliant on the traditional human-centric paradigms of the past vulnerable to a faster, colder, and infinitely more precise form of security architecture.